Registered Tibet.org shortly after that in January of 1996. And then I got involved with the Tibet movement in other ways that really took me places I never expected. But at the same time, I kept talking to Phuntsok Namgyal. Long story short, about a year and a half, a little less later, I landed in India with 4 friends and everything we needed to build the network so we could connect all the offices in Kangi and make a dial-in connection from the private office and the Norbert Link Institute and all these other places so that we could start to bring the Tibetan exile community in the government in exile into the internet age. Hi, my name is Dan Haig, from Milwaukee, Wisconsin originally. I've been living in Charlottesville, Virginia now since 2008. Well, here's what happened. When I got out of college, I went and taught English in Taiwan for a year. My brother had been in Taiwan lighting himself on fire and diving into a tank of water. This is what he did for a living. And he said, "You can go get a job teaching English on the other side of the world." I said, "Sounds good. Get me out of here." So after that, I ended up hitchhiking into Amdo. This would have been the summer of 1988. My mind was blown. I got back home, started studying Tibetan, and spent 4 years in a PhD program, which I found it necessary to quit. And after I got sucked into the .coms and found it necessary to quit that too, I thought, when I went to India, finally went to Dharamsala for my first visit and saw the need there. And, I just thought it was something that needed to happen. I was so upset with what I found when I went traveling through Tibet in 1988, and learned more about it. It just outraged me. Remembered that the Menzikang was offering its first ever series of lectures for outsiders, non-students, for Westerners, generally speaking. So this would have been in December of 1995. So I ended up going over there to study at the Menzikang, and just before I left, I went to the Nartang building, where the Department of Information is, and the Tibetan Computer Resource Center, as it was called at the time, was up on the roof, the rooftop office spaces. And it's a bit of a story, but I met Phuntsok Namgyal, who's the director of the TCRC, and spoke with him at some length and explained to him what I could do to help what they were planning to do. But when I went back with my team in April of '97, those guys, were computer experts. I still don't know anything about computers. These guys really, but it was amazing. So the TCRC had moved out of the Nartang building up to the top. I forget really what the building is called there, but it's on the roof just next to, and how did it go? The finance building, right with the Department of Education just across the street. I think they're still there. And they had more computers than they'd had a year and a half earlier. But they were still using the one email address, and anybody who sent email to Dharamsala, the emails would be printed out and they would staple them, and people would just have to know an email had come or hope an email had come and come to the office and get their little stapled message. And there were some complaints that messages were being read and all this kind of stuff. It was crazy. The software you had to use to compose and write an email, it was this weird 5 or 6 step process that I could never quite get the hang of. Only one of my team could ever really get it down reliably. It was such a strange process, in order to just write and compose and send an email. And it was all coming in and out of the one email address. And the way the mails were being shipped in and out was through what's called a UUCP dial-up connection. It was a Unix to Unix computer protocol where they could call up another Unix computer in Delhi. It was run by a Sonam Darge, who was running the TibetNet office in Delhi. And they could just send things to that computer there. And then from Delhi, there was the internet connection through ERNet that would send the emails out to this tiny, tiny, tiny little connection that India had to the rest of the world at that time. It wasn't too many years after that we started experiencing the malware attacks. So we didn't have a whole lot of trouble getting hacked ourselves at that time, but what the Chinese government started doing was sending out emails, spoofing somebody else's address and pretending they'd written an email. I remember the first, my full name is Daniel D. Haig, and they sent an email to the TSG list, the main Tibet support group list, and it was supposedly from me, and it was written in very poor English, and they signed my name Haig D. Daniel, which is hilarious because everybody knows I sign my emails with just a dot and a D anyway, so it was very obviously fake. But then they got better at doing this sort of thing, and then they started. So they would try to get people to click on links to go to a website that would install malware. Then they started the very extensive campaign of sending emails with malicious attachments, which if you dared to click and open them, your computer would get infected and all manner of things might happen. That campaign ramped up very, very sharply ahead of the 2008 Beijing Olympics. They were trying to get their hands on everybody's computer, get their hands on everyone's phone numbers and telephones, and it was really extensive because they didn't understand the United States government and the military. They didn't understand the threat they were facing. China very cleverly got in as an underdog and went under the radar for far too long. And now look what's happened. All this industrial espionage. They say it's the largest theft in history. All the intellectual property that China has stolen in the last 20 years. Wow.